cops attack black man, but he's been planning their fall all along. Jermaine Foster was tired of looking over his shoulder, tired of expecting trouble whenever a police cruiser slowed near him. But on a humid night in Baltimore, that tension he always felt in the pit of his stomach erupted into the ugliest reality. Officers from a precinct known for its dark reputation approached him with sneering grins, their badges catching the glow of the streetlights. They thought he was just another nameless black man to rough up and discard. Little did they know, Jermaine carried with him a lifetime of lessons and an intricate plan that would change their lives forever. The city of Baltimore, familiar yet unpredictable, pulsed with its usual undercurrent of tension. Grey skies stretched over the harbour, and the smell of diesel from passing boats mingled with the tang of old brick row houses. Residents bustled along the sidewalks, hustling to work, to pick up kids, or to simply make ends meet. On every corner, you could find an aspiring musician, an artist, or a small-time hustler trying to sell knockoff goods. Baltimore's heartbeat thrummed with both hope and despair. Jermaine Foster had grown up here in a cramped row house near Eutaw Place that had cracks in the walls and paint peeling off the doorframes. He shared it with his grandmother, who had raised him from infancy, and his younger sister, Tiana. Every morning, he'd go for a run around Druid Hill Park to keep his mind clear. In a city that was bursting with energy, both good and bad, Jermaine found comfort in the routine of pushing his body, letting the rhythmic sound of his sneakers on the pavement quiet the turmoil within. But living in Baltimore also meant living with the awareness that danger could lurk around any corner. Everyone knew about the corruption within certain pockets of the Baltimore Police Department. Complaints piled up year after year, bribes, excessive force, evidence tampering, and stories of brutality in neglected neighborhoods. Jermaine had witnessed more than a few grim episodes growing up, times when officers roughed up teenage kids for loitering or rummaging for loose change. It was an old, unspoken truth that sometimes the law could be bent against those who looked like him. Still, Jermaine believed in justice. He believed that with enough determination, a single person could shine a light on the darkest corners of the system. But little did he suspect how violently that spotlight would shift onto him, or how meticulously he'd have to orchestrate his vengeance. Jermaine wasn't just any young man on the streets. A recent graduate of Morgan State University, he had studied criminal justice in the hopes of one day joining the force. Ironic, he often joked, given the tension he felt whenever a patrol car rolled by. But Jermaine wanted to make a difference, to clean up the dirty segments of a department that often seemed as though it had no room for honest cops. His professors admired his willingness to question everything, to peel back layers of history, tradition, and abuse. He'd spent his postgraduate months volunteering at a local legal aid clinic, filing paperwork for cases that involved false arrests and police harassment. Jermaine had seen enough stories cross his desk to recognize the patterns. It wasn't every police officer, some of them genuinely served their communities, but there was a rotten core in that precinct on East Monument Street. Complaints went nowhere, especially when directed against a handful of seasoned officers with a reputation for brutality. Walking to the clinic one afternoon, Jermaine overheard two middle-aged women whispering about a boy who'd been wrongfully arrested, planted with drugs, by the same group of officers rumored to be running an extortion racket. Jermaine lingered long enough to confirm the details, heart twisting as the women recounted the humiliation the teenager faced in the back of a squad car. The conversation lit a fuse within Jermaine. He realized there had to be a line in the sand. Enough was enough. But how do you stand up against an entire system that protects its own? Jermaine's mentors urged caution. People who asked too many questions often found themselves on the receiving end of threatening phone calls or worse. Jermaine, though, was not afraid. He couldn't afford to be. If no one challenged these officers, who would? Late into a sticky summer night, Germain decided to walk home from the clinic rather than take the bus. The day's tension clung to him like the humid air. Street lights flickered overhead, and the occasional headlights from passing cars carved brief tunnels of visibility along the deserted sidewalks. Halfway through a quiet block, he sensed a presence behind him. Even before he turned, he heard a low whistle, the kind used to summon a dog or get someone's attention. 4 uniformed men emerged from the shadows, their posture rigid, their eyes cold. Germain recognized their faces from rumor alone. These were the very officers whose names had come up in countless legal aid forms. "Hey, tough guy," one of them sneered, shining a flashlight directly into Germain's eyes. "Got a minute?" Germain's heart pounded. He held up his hands to show he meant no harm. Even as fear buzzed through him, a quiet determination stoked his courage. "I'm just heading home," he replied evenly, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him intimidated. Without warning, one officer grabbed Germain's left arm, twisting it behind his back. Another officer smirked as he forcibly patted Germain down, fingers digging into Germain's pockets. The others stood in a circle, forming a barrier against any potential witness. "You been slinging, huh?" An officer spat, finding nothing illegal, but refusing to accept it. The flashlight was now pressed against Germain's temple, scraping his skin. Anger boiled over, but Germain knew better than to lash out physically. Any move he made would be twisted into justification for violence. "I've got nothing," he said, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging in his veins. Then came the blow, hard and sudden, sending him sprawling to the pavement. Pain exploded in his face, and blood oozed from his split lip. This was what everyone had warned him about, but he wouldn't forget. He would make them remember this night too. As Germain lay on the rough pavement, he tasted blood and concrete. A swirling sense of disbelief mixed with fury inside him. This was no ordinary stop and frisk. It was a planned intimidation tactic. The officers laughed, their voices echoing in the desolate street, secure in their power and shielded by their badges. One of them delivered a sharp kick to Germain's ribs. He gasped, each breath more painful than the last. At that moment, a flicker of headlights illuminated the scene from the corner of the street. A passing car slowed, the driver's face twisted in concern as they realized what they were witnessing. Instantly, 2 officers stepped into the beams to block the view, their hands ready to brandish firearms if the onlooker dared to intervene. The car hurriedly sped away. On the ground, Germain choked out, "Why? What did I do?" The officer who seemed to be in charge knelt down, pressing a knee into Germain's back. "You look like trouble," he said, voice cold. "Now keep your mouth shut, unless you want a ride to the station." Germain's vision blurred from the force of the knee digging into his spine, but in that haze, determination crystallized. He might be powerless in this moment, but a bigger plan was forming. It had been forming for some time, in fact, fed by the countless stories of police corruption he'd encountered at the legal aid clinic, by the testimonies of silent victims too afraid to speak. Soon, the officers decided they'd had their fun for the night. One of them tossed Germain's wallet next to him and spat, "Watch yourself, kid." Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they melted back into the night. Germain lay there for several long moments, wincing in pain, staring at the sky. In that silent darkness, he pledged that their cruelty would not go unanswered. The hospital waiting room was cold and dreary. Germain sat there the next morning, his ribs bandaged and stitches in his lip, staring at the sterile walls. Tiana, his younger sister, clutched his hand with white-knuckled tension. Grandmother Ethel tapped her cane against the linoleum floor, furious and fearful all at once. They had come straight to the ER as soon as Germain limped through the front door at dawn. The doctor asked if Jermaine wanted to file a police report. Jermaine exchanged a glance with Tiana, and a silent agreement passed between them. This was bigger than a standard complaint. Filing a report would only stir up more hostility if it disappeared into the system. They needed something more strategic. At home later that day, Jermaine scribbled notes in a battered journal filled with case references and interview transcripts. He had been gathering evidence for months, quietly listening to stories from victims who never dared to come forward. A pattern emerged. The same squad, always at night, always in areas where cameras were conveniently broken. Jermaine had contacts, 2 community activists, a few disillusioned cops who wanted the truth out. He began to piece together a map of names, dates, and addresses. He also had a friend, Marcus Johnson, an investigative reporter at the Baltimore Sun. They'd grown up together, the kind of friends who had each other's backs no matter what. Jermaine knew that if he could assemble a solid set of evidence, Marcus could blow the lid off the entire operation. But first, Jermaine needed absolute proof. Videos, witness statements, anything indisputable. He wanted these officers not just reprimanded, but forced to face criminal charges. The plan was risky. But Jermaine understood the stakes. Corruption didn't just destroy individual lives, it eroded communities. If he didn't act, who would? Jermaine's first move was to set up a meeting with Lisa Rodriguez, a community organizer known for her fierce advocacy. They met at a booth in a dimly lit diner on North Avenue. The stale smell of coffee and fries enveloped them as they leaned close, speaking in hushed tones. Lisa described a network of neighborhoods terrorized by these officers, particularly a Sergeant Walker and 3 subordinates, Tucker, Hughes, and Malone. Rumor had it they coordinated with certain gang members, turning a blind eye to drug trafficking in exchange for money. "I tried collecting statements, but witnesses disappear," Lisa said quietly, stirring her coffee more than she actually drank it. Jermaine nodded. "I have enough from the legal clinic to see a pattern: false charges, bribes, beatings, intimidation. The question is, how do we bring them down?" Lisa reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a small list of names. "Start with these," she said. "People who were wrongfully arrested but never got their day in court. Maybe you can convince them to talk." He left the diner with the list and a renewed sense of urgency. That very night, Jermaine knocked on doors, scouring run-down apartment buildings and battered townhomes. Some slammed the door in his face, still too terrified. Others let him in cautiously, voices trembling as they recounted nights spent in holding cells on baseless charges. Slowly, the puzzle came together. The picture was bigger and uglier than Jermaine had imagined. It wasn't just street-level harassment, it was a comprehensive racket. Good cops who tried to speak out found themselves sidelined or threatened. Jermaine realized he was unraveling a tapestry of systemic rot. A storm was brewing, and Jermaine was at its center. If he could collect enough evidence, he'd have a case so massive that no one, not even the brass at Baltimore PD, could bury it. Jermaine was no stranger to risk. His life had taught him resilience, but even so, the plan he formulated required nerves of steel. He decided to set up a sting operation of sorts, collecting irrefutable video and audio evidence of these officers abusing their power. With the help of Lisa and Marcus, he outfitted an abandoned row house in East Baltimore with hidden cameras. They chose an area the corrupt squad often patrolled, a place known for petty crime but also for being out of sight, out of mind. The plan was simple in concept, but dangerous in practice. Jermaine spread word on the street that someone was selling illegal goods out of the row house, a rumor guaranteed to attract the interest of officers who liked to confiscate items for personal profit. He'd be there, playing the role of a small-time hustler, waiting for the cops to show up unannounced. Over the next week, Jermaine and Marcus painstakingly tested the concealed cameras. One was hidden in a broken light fixture, another in a hollowed-out vent, a third in a decrepit corner near the baseboards. Each lens was angled to capture different vantage points. They couldn't risk the cameras failing at a critical moment. Meanwhile, the tension took a toll on Germain's family. Tiana begged him to reconsider, frightened that if things went wrong, the officers would retaliate mercilessly. Grandmother Ethel prayed in the living room, her Bible open on her lap, whispering for divine protection. Germain reassured them that this was the only way to end the cycle of fear that had gripped their community for too long. His bruises had mostly healed by now, but the memory of that night lingered. Every ache reminded him why he had to see this through, no matter the cost. The night arrived, heavy and thick with anticipation. Germain sat alone in the dimly lit, abandoned row house, a single flickering bulb overhead, casting ominous shadows across cracked walls. He could hear the distant hum of traffic on Orleans Street, but otherwise the world was eerily silent. He passed the time by nervously tapping his foot, checking his phone for any missed calls from Marcus or Lisa. Shortly after midnight, he heard the crunch of footsteps outside. Through a small gap in the boarded-up window, he saw 4 silhouettes approaching. A surge of adrenaline shot through him. He recognized the burly frame of Sergeant Walker up front. Tucker, Hughes, and Malone followed. "Baltimore PD," Walker announced, pushing open the sagging door with a gloved hand. They entered without a warrant, guns drawn, shining flashlights that sliced through the darkness. Germain raised his hands in mock surrender. "Well, well," Walker sneered, shining his flashlight in Germain's eyes. "Word is, you've got contraband in here." Germain feigned terror. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, playing the part of a frightened hustler. Inside, his heart pounded so loud he wondered if they could hear it. Tucker and Hughes moved deeper into the room, rummaging through the debris. "He's messing with us, Sarge," Tucker grunted. "Let's teach him a lesson." The glint in Walker's eyes showed Germain exactly what was about to happen. Walker lunged, grabbing Germain by the shirt collar and slamming him against the wall. Germain winced, not purely from the physical pain, but from the memory of how this felt all those weeks ago. He clung to the hope that the cameras were catching every second. An air of danger crackled through the row house. Germain only needed them to incriminate themselves fully, to put into words their intentions, their corruption. Then the house of cards would collapse. Walker's flashlight beam trembled slightly as he pressed it against Germain's temple, reminiscent of the brutal street encounter. But this time, Germain was prepared. He let out a carefully calculated whimper, heightening the officer's twisted sense of power. Beside him, Malone hissed, "Where's the stash?" Germain took a shaky breath. I don't have anything." "I swear, you can check." He motioned weakly to the trash-strewn corner of the room. Hughes yanked open a cardboard box, only to find empty beer bottles and rotting newspapers. Anger flared. "Don't play with us," he warned, stepping closer. Walker signaled his men to close in. They patted Germain down viciously, each blow designed to bruise and intimidate. Finally, Walker spoke. "This is how it works. You give us our cut, or we'll pin you with possession. We'll say we found a bag of coke on you. Hell, we might just beat you senseless and say you resisted arrest." Germain's stomach twisted at the brazen cruelty in Walker's voice, but he forced himself to remain in character. "I don't have anything," he pleaded. It was the opening Walker needed. He drew back his fist and struck Germain across the jaw. Germain's head snapped back, crashing into the wall behind him. In the reflection of a broken mirror, Germain caught a glimpse of a small red light, confirmation that the camera was recording everything. Suddenly, a jolt of defiance fired through Germain. He had them. He had what he needed. "Actually," he murmured, the words strained through a throbbing mouth, "I think you'll want to check the ceiling fixture." "Ceiling fixture?" Tucker repeated suspiciously, shining his flashlight upward. Germain felt a grim satisfaction. If all went well, backup was on the way back up that would catch these officers in their worst moment. The game was about to end. Before the officers could react, the door burst open a second time. The beams of flashlights and the shouts of police echoed in the cramped space. Except this time, it wasn't Walker's squad. It was Internal Affairs, accompanied by Marcus, who was filming with a press pass swinging around his neck. Hands where we can see them. An detective barked, stepping into the room. The shock on Walker's face was palpable. His flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Tucker, Hughes, and Malone spun around, guns partially raised in confusion, but there was no resisting. They were caught red-handed. IA detectives moved swiftly, disarming the officers and demanding that they drop to their knees. Each was cuffed with the same brutal efficiency they had shown their victims. Marcus rushed to Jermaine's side. "You okay, man?" he asked, eyes darting between Jermaine's bruises and the officers now pinned to the ground. Jermaine nodded through the pain, relief flooding him at the sight of justice in action. The IA detective leading the operation gestured toward the hidden cameras. "We have recorded evidence of extortion, assault, and probable cause for multiple counts of corruption. Sergeant Walker, you and your men are under arrest." Walker glared at Jermaine, struggling against the cuffs. "You set us up!" he spat, hatred twisting his features. Jermaine's voice shook with a mixture of adrenaline and righteous anger. "You're right, I did. And so did every person you've hurt in these streets. This is bigger than just me." From outside came the muffled roar of sirens, red and blue lights dancing in the broken windows. Neighbors began to gather, eyes wide in disbelief as they realized what was happening. In that instant, Jermaine felt the heavy weight of fear lift from his shoulders. Justice wasn't just an idea, it was real, and it had finally come for those who believed themselves untouchable. The next few days unraveled like a thunderstorm across Baltimore. News of the late-night sting spread rapidly. Headlines in the Baltimore Sun trumpeted, "Corrupt cops busted in undercover operation." Local TV stations rolled footage of the police cruisers pulling away from the abandoned row house, Sergeant Walker and his men glaring from the back seats of unmarked cars. The images served as validation for a community that had felt silenced for too long. Interviews with victims poured in, providing even more evidence against the disgraced officers. Jermaine spent those days in a whirlwind of depositions, official statements, and media coverage. His phone barely stopped ringing. Lawyers from the state's attorney's office requested every piece of footage and documentation he had. Lisa Rodriguez found herself overwhelmed with requests for interviews, while Marcus, channeling his journalistic instincts, carefully shaped the narrative so the public could finally see what people in those neighborhoods had been living through. For Jermaine, it was a bittersweet moment. Yes, justice had been served, but it came at a cost, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Each new sunrise brought a fresh wave of scrutiny. Some hailed him as a hero, but others whispered that he had betrayed the police, that he'd overstepped. Anonymous threats trickled in, phone messages with hushed voices warning him to watch his back. Jermaine's family grew worried, installing a new security system at home. Grandmother Ethel clutched her Bible tighter than ever, praying for Jermaine's protection while praising him for standing on the side of truth. But the authorities could no longer ignore the scale of corruption. By the end of the week, the precinct on East Monument Street had suspended several more officers pending investigation. A thorough probe of department-wide misconduct had begun, ignited by the evidence Jermaine's operation exposed. None of it guaranteed systemic change overnight, but it was a massive crack in the seemingly impenetrable wall of institutional abuse. One afternoon, Jermaine stood outside the courthouse, leaning on a cane to ease the pressure on bruised ribs. He looked up at the massive grey stone building with exhaustion in his eyes. Lisa was by his side, reading from a document detailing the latest developments, charges of assault, conspiracy, racketeering. The list seemed endless. "You did it," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He let out a shaky breath. We did it, he corrected, all of us who refused to keep quiet. At that moment, a small group of residents approached people Germain recognized from the battered apartment complexes and row houses where he'd collected testimonies. They came forward, tears in their eyes, to thank him. One woman, Miss Green, who had lost her son to a false imprisonment, pressed Germain's hand in gratitude. He always said someone would stand up for him one day, she murmured. Marcus strolled over, camera crew behind him. They want an interview for the evening news, he said, nodding toward the reporter. Germain swallowed, his nerves still raw from the events of the last few weeks. But he knew he couldn't stop now. He had to keep telling the truth, keep shining that bright, unforgiving light into the dark corners of the system. He gave a measured statement, urging citizens to cooperate with the ongoing investigations, asking them to step forward if they had any information. He finished by acknowledging the countless others who had been victimized and could never speak for themselves. The cameras panned out, capturing the small crowd around him, faces filled with relief, anger, hope, and a collective desire for change. Later that night, Germain sat on the worn-out sofa in his grandmother's living room, Tiana and grandmother Ethel beside him. Despite the bruises, the fear, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. There was a long road to healing and reform, but at least the journey had begun. And though the city still pulsed with tension like any place wrestling with its own demons, it also pulsed with the renewed possibility that even the mightiest can fall when good people dare to fight for what is right. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey of corruption, courage, and ultimate justice. Germain Foster's story reminds us that in a world where power can be easily misused, determination and unity can crack even the toughest barriers. Standing up for what's right isn't always an easy path. It may demand sacrifice, bravery, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of change. Yet as we've witnessed, a single individual with a well-orchestrated plan, supported by a resilient community, can spark a movement that brings the corrupt to their knees. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Spread the word so more people can hear stories of bravery and learn that justice can still prevail against all odds. Together, let's continue to shine light into every dark corner and inspire change in our communities.